now we want to get started, as we often do on Tuesday mornings, with Ambassador Comissiong, who's here for conversations on CARICOM. Good morning to you. Always great to have you here.
Good morning, Tisha, and let me take this opportunity to wish you Merry Christmas in advance.
We're not going to see you before Christmas?
I suspect this is probably our last conversation on CARICOM for the year.
Before
Next
Christmas.
Tuesday will be
Let me check.
Christmas Eve.
Yeah, but you will be here, won't you?
You
Yes,
really?
you will be. I'm checking the clock.
Anyhow, I wish you Merry Christmas. If I have to do it a second time, then
That's okay.
yeah,
I
twice as good.
would most definitely accept. So this morning you want to bring us up to speed on how CARICOM is working on tackling crime throughout the region. This is a challenge that really exists across the region. There's no one territory that's spared.
Yes, well, I thought that perhaps the best note on which to end conversations on CARICOM in 2024 is to look at how CARICOM is addressing this issue that perhaps has been the number one issue on the minds of Barbadians throughout the course of this year. You know, we had a surprising upsurge in murders, and especially gun-related murders this year. We jumped from 21 in 2023. I think we have 49 now. So but as you said, it's not just Barbados, it's right across the region, and in fact, Barbados has one of the lowest homicide rates. So you could imagine what's happening with several of our fellow CARICOM member states. So yes, we want to look at what CARICOM is doing to address this issue.
Now we're going to take a look at the regional symposia that CARICOM held addressing crime and violence. And the interesting perspective is now kind of taking on the face of being labeled as a public health issue.
Yeah.
How do you think that will change the approach, and certainly how we're able to manage the fallout from gun crime specifically, but crime and violence generally?
Well, so CARICOM has come with this novel approach of seeing crime and violence as a public health issue, a public health emergency. And they got our Caribbean Regional Public Health Agency to work out a definition. So let me share the definition of crime and violence as a public health issue, right? The public health approach to violence and crimes is a systemic, multidisciplinary, evidence-based framework that seeks to understand, prevent, and mitigate violence and crime by addressing their societal, behavioral, and environmental determinants. This approach applies public health principles such as surveillance, risk, and protective factor identification, intervention, monitoring, and evaluation to reduce the incidence, impact, and recurrence of violence and crime. This approach involves multi-sectors, including law enforcement, health, education, academia, social services, and community stakeholders working collaboratively to design and implement interventions to reduce harm, enhance public safety, and build cohesive communities. So, an all-of-society approach, a multi-sector approach, and not simply seeing crime and violence as something for the police and for the judiciary and for the prison system, but looking at the social determinants of crime. So looking at how our educational system can help, how our health system can help, mental health issues, for example. So that's the new approach that CARICOM is pioneering.
Oh, well, it truly is really refreshing to hear that. Looking at the root causes. Before we move on, though, let's look back at Attorney General Dale Marshall's remarks during the launch of the Alliance for Security, Development and Justice, which took place on the 12th of December.
The Barbados situation has been highlighted at the opening of a two-day regional security and justice summit hosted by the Attorney General's Office and the Inter-American Development Bank. Attorney General Dear Marshall says 49 is an alarming figure considering the island's size.
For you, 49 may not seem like a significant figure, but 49 homicides in little Barbados is a big thing for us. But even that statistic speaks to even more concerning social concerns, since of that number, 49, 16 were as a result of stabbings and bludgeonings. The others were from firearms. That 16 that were the results of stabbings and bludgeonings suggests that there may be underlying mental issues, conflict resolution issues, or anger management issues that we also have to embrace and grapple with as countries.
The Attorney General acknowledges the region has to formulate a common plan of action to address the issues of rising crime. He says Barbados therefore welcomes the establishment of the Alliance for Security, Development and Justice, which will be launched tomorrow.
Its objectives, which focus on the protection of vulnerable populations, building institutional capacity in law enforcement agencies, and stemming illicit financial flows, are problems with which the Caribbean region is grappling. This alliance follows on the heels of our own efforts within the region. Last year, under the chairmanship of Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. the Honorable Keith Rowley, the region's heads convened in Trinidad and Tobago to examine crime and violence as a public health concern.
All right. Very, very interesting message, sharing some of the concerns that you noted up front, but your takeaways from the AG's presentation.
Well, you know, the first point the AG made was to reflect on the number of homicides in Barbados. And he said to the audience, you know, that Barbados's number might not seem like a big number to you, but for us, it's very, very problematical. And to understand the context of that statement, you know, we have the statistics, the homicide statistics for 2023. I have 13 of the CARICOM countries here. The only country that was below Barbados in 2023 in terms of homicides was Suriname. I don't want to mention the ones that were above us, but just to give an example, right? In 2023, our statistics were we had seven homicides per 100,000 of the population. Other CARICOM countries, 17, 19, 21, 26, 37, 40, 41, 46, 50, 60, 65. So there was one CARICOM country that in 2023 had 9 times the number of homicides as Barbados had, you know, in terms of the population ratio, numbers of homicides per 100,000 of the population. So that just tells you how serious, we feel it in Barbados, but it tells you how serious the problem is right across the region. So we were like, you know, the second lowest in 2023. We have had a jump this year, and that's probably going to take, but that jump is probably not going to move our position at all. We would probably still be the second lowest, even though we had that very significant jump. So that's just to give an idea that it's not a Barbados problem. It is really a regional problem, and we're trying hard to address it. So when the AG was speaking at the launch of a new initiative called the Alliance for Security, Development and Justice. And so that's another initiative being sponsored by the Inter-American Development Bank. But as he noted, that is now complementing what CARICOM already started last year when the CARICOM heads of government had that regional summit in Trinidad and Tobago on crime and violence. And then we followed up this year in November. And we had something very unique because we had a second symposium hosted by Barbados, but held in Guyana. So Caribbean Integration in Action. So Barbados had undertaken to host it, but it was coinciding with the heads of government going to Guyana to meet with the President of India. So Barbados and Guyana came together and said, well, okay, Barbados will host it, or be hosted it in Guyana. But the point is that the region has taken these new initiatives since April of last year. And at the symposium in Guyana, we were able to report some progress from last year. So, for example, one of the decisions made last year was that we have to implement the CARICOM Arrest Warrant Treaty. That is the treaty that would allow us, our governments, to arrest CARICOM nationals regardless of which territory they come from, if they're wanted for crime in their home territory. So the legislation has now been developed to put that in place. Last year, we said that we were very concerned about the firearms coming out of the United States. Mexico was suing the U.S. gun manufacturers for their irresponsibility. And several CARICOM countries took a decision that they were going to join Mexico's case. That happened, and perhaps as a result of that, we also said we were going to enhance the Regional Information Ballistics Network. That is the network across the region that does intelligence on illegal firearms, and we are now finally getting the cooperation of the American authorities in greater intelligence about tracking these firearms, most of which come out of the United States of America. We also strengthened the capacity of the Regional Intelligence Fusion Center in Trinidad and Tobago. And so it might be useful, Tisha, just to let viewers know the type of infrastructure that CARICOM has in place for our security. And it was in 2005 that CARICOM decided that security had to be one of the pillars of the integration movement. Prior to 2005, we were dealing with trade and economic integration, functional cooperation, foreign affairs, and in 2005 we decided, look, we also have to make security a pillar. So that was the decision in 2005. By 2006, we established CARICOM Impacts, the CARICOM implementation mechanism for crime and security. That is the CARICOM institution that is charged with carrying out the CARICOM agenda on security, and that is located in Trinidad. And then 2007, Impacts established two sub-agencies. We established the Regional Intelligence Fusion Center in Trinidad. That's the entity that is responsible for gathering all the intelligence about criminal activities, about terrorism-related activities, analyzing it, and making the information available to governments. And then we also established the Joint Regional Communications Center in Barbados. And that is the entity that is responsible for the Advanced Passenger Information System, so that we have, when a plane takes off anywhere in the world coming into our region, we already know before it lands, who is on board, anybody who might have criminal backgrounds, etc., etc. So that is the infrastructure that CARICOM put in place several years ago to kind of protect the security of our region. So I just want viewers to know that infrastructure actually exists. So it's not like we are defenseless. We actually have institutions looking out for us in this area. But the new approach in response to these rising levels, particularly of homicides, is to approach this issue from a multi-sector public health perspective.
How has this impacted how Caribbean leaders are looking at other things that heads of government, CARICOM, you guys really have been working on throughout the years, namely things like just moving forward with free movement and and things of that nature? Has it impacted the way of thinking for Caribbean leaders at all, given that we are seeing this proliferation of, illegal firearms and having crime rates really go through the roof all across the region?
Yeah, well, it has not affected CARICOM's commitment to free movement because, as I said, it's a common. It's not like some countries are not suffering it, and others are. So we can't say, okay, we isolate the problem to X CARICOM country or Y CARICOM country. It's right across the board. But what we are doing, have the institutions that we have in place, part of the plan is really to enhance and upgrade those institutions. So you would have heard that it was decided last year to enhance the Regional Intelligence Fusion Center in TNT. That was done over the past 12 months, so improvements were made there. At the symposium in Guyana in November, one of the decisions taken was to say to Impacts, CARICOM Impacts, to say to Impacts, you go away and you look at the entire structure. Come back to us and tell us where you think there are any weaknesses, where you think you need strengthening, where you might need additional resources. So that was one of the decisions taken. Impacts is to go away and to review this very carefully and to come back to the heads of government. So I think that is how we are approaching it. And the agreement is, we have agreed that every CARICOM country will develop and put in place a special program to address this issue using the public health multidisciplinary approach. And I should also say, Tisha, that we are also receiving a lot of assistance from the Caribbean Court of Justice, because in last year, the Caribbean Court of Justice held a symposium here in Barbados, and they came up with a plan, a declaration known as the Needham's Point Declaration. And in fact, the heads of government were so impressed with what the CCJ, the judges, the judicial officers, they're thinking, that they have endorsed the Needham's Point Declaration, and they are now taking the Needham's Point Declaration and turning it into an action plan, which will be implemented. They also have agreed to put resources behind it. This new approach. So the CARICOM Secretariat, for example, is to develop a contribution formula for a Barbados 5 million fund to help with some of these developments. A task force has been set up to look at drafting new legislation, because if we are going to do these new approaches, a whole set of new legislation is going to be required. At the symposium in November, the heads of government agreed on a whole set of interventions. A critical one, you would have heard our AG speak about the mental health aspect of some of these crimes. So that was recognized, that there is a serious mental health problem that needs to be addressed, and that is going to be one of the central elements of addressing crime and violence from a public health perspective. There's going to be a lot more mental health interventions, a lot more interventions at the level of the school system. There's going to be a big focus on rehabilitating offenders. We have this thing, people go to prison, they have a prison sentence, they come out, there's no support structure, nobody will employ them, nobody in the private sector will employ them because they have a prison record. Some of them end up back in crime. So there's a recognition that this is a problem, that we must have programs in place to reintegrate ex-convicts into society. There's also recognition that victims, the children of victims, the children of people who are incarcerated for long periods of time, that there must be programs in place to assist these folk. Otherwise, they can kind of fall off the table. So a whole set of new thinking about the societal and behavioral aspects of crime and how we can do the interventions.
All right, so it seems like much progress has been made coming out of the various meetings and with the setting up of these various new alliances, so to speak. And of course, hearing more about how we are working across borders to try to make the crime situation better across the region, because we are so small and close, is of utmost importance.
One other thing, Tisha, especially pertinent to CBC, is that the heads have agreed that there's something wrong with a lot of our artistic output, especially the music, that too much of the music is promoting, crassness, crudity, disrespect for women, etc., and that there's an initiative now to bring the artists together to discuss this and to say to the artists, you have a big role to play, and to get them to play that role.
That certainly will be interesting, because I know the last time that happened in Barbados, it was a very interesting backlash from even the public in terms of how they received that. But that's a conversation for another day. Thank you, as always, Ambassador, for sharing with us.
My pleasure, Tisha.
Morning, morning, morning. Good morning. Good morning to you.